Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bob Krell, host of the Healthy Indoors Show and the publisher of Healthy Indoors Magazine, and here to welcome you to another edition of our show. With us today, I'm really happy to introduce our one and only guest. We're not doing a panel for a change. We have Corbett Lunsford, who is the co-host of the PBS television series Home Diagnosis, ready to come out in season 2, and also the founder of the Building Performance Workshop. How you doing, Corbett?
Awesome, Bob. Thank you for having me.
So how is it down in the Atlanta area right now?
How is it? It's good. You know, it's hot and muggy, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we've got uprisings happening across the country. So it's normal. It's pretty much normal.
Yeah, just the normal summer. So what for those of you who haven't started watching the live streamed edition of the Healthy Indoor Show from the beginning, Corbett is actually I would say the at least a very heavy impetus for us creating this show, doing it as a live stream. We used to do it as a recorded show at least once a month for the magazine. But right at the onset of the real bad stuff of the pandemic back in March, Corbett called me up on a Sunday evening, I think, right? It was over the weekend.
I think it was Friday, and by
or
Sunday,
maybe it was a Friday.
you and I had a plan.
We started talking about it on a Friday.
Yeah, we just said, we got to talk about this somehow. This is gonna affect indoor
let's
spaces.
live stream something. Can you live stream something? I'm like, well, you do a healthy, we could live stream that. And not a week after that, we were live streaming.
Bingo.
And I decided not to stop.
Good for you. You have a problem with that, though.
It was,
as a friend of Bob's, I'm just going to tell everybody that if there's a guy doing some horrible job that no one should have to do, you go up and poke him on the shoulder. It's probably Bob.
Yeah, maybe. It's self-inflicted entrepreneurial psychosis or something. I don't know, but so we did this. We did a really aggressive live streamed event with a lot of presenters. We did a 3-part series. We blew the whole part of it. Was on the 19th of March. And I remember it was a very long shoot. We kept going on and on and on, and tons of great content. I mean, that first day was just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Plethora of good info. And then we decided to every Thursday just keep firing them off at 1 p.m. So here we are 4 months later.
Glad to be back. Lots has happened since then.
An awful lot has happened.
Mm-hmm.
Pandemic didn't go away.
No, it's true. And it's getting, I feel like we haven't heard people talking about the cleaning stuff quite as much as I'd expect. I don't know. I feel like everything is so loud that it's hard to hear. And that's the same in diagnostics when you're testing houses, right? It's like that if one element is overpowering others, then you can't hear any of the subtle stuff that's going on. But I feel like there's probably tons of stuff going on with people staying indoors, even more in their homes than they already have, which is, essentially 50% of their entire lives, which, we all spend inside of our homes.
Sure. So it increased your domicile indoor occupancy, no question about it, right? Many people are still at home or working from home. It hasn't changed my life much because our studio for Healthy Indoors, IQ Net Studio, is actually at my home in Syracuse. It's a separate building, so my commute is 70 feet from my house. So that's I'm still doing the commute.
My commute is 50 feet from my house, by the way. So
there you go.
My work site is right out there where we're building the big house that we're going to move out of this tiny house and into.
Which we're going to talk about today. Because Corbett, for those of you watching, Corbett is actually building a home. He and his wife Grace are not just co-hosting PBS television shows and raising children, but they're general contractors now.
It's true. And also tradespeople. Grace is less on the trade side, but my parents are my crew. They bought a house right behind ours. And so they come over. We were working, we work 5 days a week in the house. And so we're there all day long. And we're insulating right now and doing interior air sealing, which is like an interior house wrap. I'm installing the ductwork. I'm installing sheet metal and manufacturing and fabricating sheet metal parts and doing the water plumbing. And we installed the deck and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I have had very few injuries on my work site. I will say a couple times my back has put me out a couple days in a row, but.
So I guess that leads to the question of, you obviously have, with your Building Performance Workshop, have been talking about ways to, improve how buildings perform, and, indoor environmental has always been a factor of that. So, what drove you and Grace to actually take on a task like this? It's a pretty big task, building your own home.
It is, and I think there's a superpower and a handicap in the same thing, which is that we don't get very easily intimidated by things. So when we decided to make our own television show, raise all the money ourselves, and literally I'm the one who raises the money. I call people and I say, hey, can you give me money for a PBS television show? And then they hopefully give me money. Most of the time they don't, but sometimes they do, enough for us to actually do it. That doesn't scare us. And then doing it, and then building this house, which is the world's highest performance tiny house on wheels, which we live in still, which you can see there. But I'd say it's also a handicap because it gets you into things, so like building a big house is much different than building a tiny house. And so took us 5 days or 5 months, 7 days a week is what it took me to build this with my parents. And then they volunteered to come help me build that. We've been working on that for a year and a half over there. So, and when I say over there, I mean, it's 50 feet outside the door there. On our,
How many, so square footage, your tiny house is what, like under 300 square feet?
200. Okay. And the big house is 2,200 square feet of living space, and then 800 square feet of a studio space, which is for our filmmaking, for music. I used to be a professional musician. Grace used to be a professional dancer. So it's like our playroom, basically.
Nice.
That studio.
Nice. So that's a sizable increase in square footage construction.
Yes. And for 2 kids and 2 cats that also live in here with us, and they might come up here and bother me at some point. But the more immediate answer to your question is that there's really no way to get cred in practical building science without being a builder or an installer, contractor of some kind. My history is in diagnostics. I test people's houses all the time. And I know all about what they're actually doing, to the point where like I'll win any argument with a mechanical engineer or an architect or a builder because I have actual information. And that goes for anybody who's watching the show who also uses test tools. But there is a difference between knowing what's going on and truly understanding all of the nuances that it takes to really fix that or to prevent it in the first place. So predicting problems is what the diagnostics is for, but then preventing them really takes hands-on stuff. And like, for example, when you run a drain line, you don't run it straight up underneath the sink, because then the vent is going to have to continue there, and somebody's going to want to put a light fixture right above the sink and a mirror and all that stuff. And if you've got this drain line, so like those little things that are ridiculous, no one would want to know that. Mm-hmm. But it takes actually being there and having these conversations, saying, why did we do it that way again? And to really understand like how complex the system really is. And we're always saying the house is a system, the house is a system. But
doing it rather than just talking about it,
yes.
It is different. Yeah.
And so I'm after cred, and I want to know that if a builder gives me a hard time, if an HVAC professional gives me a hard time, I know, I don't just know my response to it, but I know their perspective on it. And I know why they're arguing with me about it. Not just what they're saying, but what they mean, what's underlying the subtext behind everything. Because that's a big part of having these conversations in the 21st century is like subtext is so pervasive and nobody means what they say anymore.
Why, and to get on the side here, why do you think that's the case? Is that seems like it's more pervasive now than it was, right? Yeah, are people more afraid to actually,
probably that, right? Yeah. Being afraid to offend people and being politically correct and all that training that we've had, but also marketing, right? So like I could say, you want a beautiful life, right? Don't you want a beautiful life for your children? And the next thing I'm going to say is, then you should buy this lotion or whatever it is. It's just like, you're not going to answer me and say, yes, I want a beautiful life for my children, because then you're on the hook for buying the timeshare that I'm about to sell you. In fact, I've been selling to you since we sat down and started having coffee. So I think that's the marketing thing, I think, is a problem. And also politics is so, bipolar. It's like, am I on this side or that side? And there's no gray area. I can't be a human being. I have to be.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a lot of give and take anymore, right? It's polarized.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
happy face or sad face? That's all you have.
Is that, or I thought it was just angry face or ambivalent face, but okay, all right, one way or another. So the house project, I mean, it's going well. You've been featuring snippets from it in your monthly edition in Healthy Indoors magazine. So I've been seeing part of the process going along. What's your estimated time of completion?
We hope to be moving in by Christmas.
Nice.
But the whole point of the build is not to show people what they should be doing. In fact, that's like when people start arguing with me about like, oh, well, there's a better way to do it. I don't care. And in fact, I don't want anyone to do it the way that we're doing it out there. Just like I would never give anybody the plans for this tiny house, because it's not supposed to be replicated. What we're trying to do is tell a story about tuning the machine that is your house. And the big thing lately has been, like people are saying, why are you doing interior air sealing? So just to back up in time, we air sealed the outside of the house with an all-in-one weather-resistant barrier. It's a sheathing that ours was Georgia Pacific Force Field. People have seen Zip System. You've got an LP product that's the same thing. And it's basically a house wrap that's laminated to the sheathing, OSB or plywood, what have you. And when we tested that, we didn't just do a blower door test, which showed that we were 20% or 30% tighter than passive house requires.
Wow.
But we also then went ahead and pressurized it to 5 times as much as a blower door test normally does. So we went from 50 pascals, which is a blower door test, to 250 pascals, which is an inch of water column. And then we sprayed the house down with a pressure washer to try and force air to leak in and find out exactly where that was happening. So I know for a fact how the house performs, and yet we're still doing more air sealing. Now we're doing an entire interior house wrap behind the drywall. And people are asking, why are you doing that? You've already hit this thing. And it's because this is not a work of art. It's not a painting that's going to just sit on a wall. It's a machine. So when you're fixing somebody's engine, you don't just take your wrench and tighten all the bolts. And then you're like, okay, all done. I tightened them. You go around again and you tighten them all again after you tighten them all one time, because this is a machine and it must work properly. So that idea of trying to transform this thing about a house being a collection of goods and products that happen to be dumped in the same place at the same time, to a working system that has its own invisible dynamics of physics, chemistry, and microbiology, and talking about how those things can be, like, for example, to shoot ahead to the TV show, we have 2 whole episodes on home chem, which I'm not supposed to say home chem on PBS because it's like it's a brand.
Okay,
but
we can say it here because we're commercial, and
so home chemistry is basically what it means. But it was an experiment that we were privy to, that we were there for. Bob was there as well, and it stood for House Observations of Microbial and Environmental Chemistry. And we learned more in this 1-month study than we have learned in the past 20 years of studying indoor air quality in homes. And so the first episode, half an hour solid of our show, episode 10, is going to be the problem of home chem. And all of the things, all the ways that your chemistry and your microbiology can go wrong because of interactions with the invisible physics.
Okay.
All this stuff is totally invisible and you can't tell. It's like people say, oh, radon isn't real, or it's not really a threat. It's like, just because it's invisible doesn't mean that it's not a real thing. And then the second part to that, the whole second half hour, is going to be the solution to home chem and how you actually tune this. So trying to tell the story about, like, here's what could possibly go wrong with this house. And it is a myriad of ways that I could poison my children. And that's why we make the show. We produce it ourselves, is because I'm allowed to say, I know for a fact that I'm not poisoning my children, which then makes everyone else think, I can't prove that. Am I poisoning my children? And the answer is, you may be poisoning your children. Yes. And then my job is to say, don't worry. Keep your head calm.
Don't worry, because they're your children. No.
Right. Don't get ants in your pants. You can solve it. And this is how you do that. You think about the things that are interacting here. We use the 4-3-2-1 approach. We pay attention to the physics, the chemistry, and the microbiology, and you tune all the things together. So, really having a hand in the HVAC system and really having a hand in the enclosure. I now understand why the HVAC guys and the insulators don't talk to each other, because it's difficult to make those two things be one machine. So that all is like helpful in my formulating of the story, the master story that we're trying to tell over the entire season of the television show.
And I get that too, Corbett. So I was an IAQ guy, right, an indoor environmental consultant and contractor for probably 21 years, 20 years before I got into any building performance type stuff. And again, I was always conscious of that, but we never, like my company here in Syracuse and upstate New York, we always saw the problems, and we'd be like, yeah, you should get somebody come in and do some pressure diagnostics and do a blower door test and blah 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 and do air sealing, but weren't involved with that. And so then I went down the rabbit hole of, I'm going to start getting BPI certifications. The next thing you know, we're an ICERTA contractor. Next thing you know, we go from doing commercial air duct cleaning and mold remediation and all that kind of good stuff to, we buy a proportioner, we've got spray foam, we've got a Crendel machine, we're blowing cellulose and fiberglass, we're doing air sealing, we're doing home energy audits, we're doing all that. We're not selling windows because we're trying to improve energy savings, at least with a payback in somebody's at least one lifetime. So that's, stay away from that a little bit.
Yeah.
But the point I was getting to is that never had my hands in that before as an IAQ professional, and suddenly being able to, actually have a realization of what it's like to actually apply spray foam. Having done it, I did probably 200 applications myself, operating it and seeing the pitfalls. And, we were doing stuff early on in the mid 2000s. We were doing full containments for spray foam. Who was doing that? I guess we were IAQ guys were going like, wow, there's off gassing, polyisocyanates. You can't be blowing that stuff and having occupants breathe that stuff. You need negative air machines and barriers if you're going to apply it in an occupied building.
And how much does that person deserve to be paid for putting on the full suit with the oxygen pumped in and all that stuff? And it's like,
well, just the fact that you have airline respirators for your workers instead of putting half face on them that don't protect them from the chemicals. Or even full faces. I see guys walking around with APRs working in spray foam. It's like, that doesn't protect you. You shouldn't wear that.
Yeah, but I would even go further, because we're the Healthy Indoors Minute that we're about to release in August here with you is about our interior space. We built a super airtight house, and lots of builders out there are building super airtight houses, and they do not get it. And this is a big problem. So, anybody knows a builder, works with builders, please let them know, like, you got to be doing testing on your own work, because your building probably way more airtight than you think. So now you built this airtight house, but you don't have the HVAC working yet, because you got the roof on and you got the air sealing in place and you're insulating. But the HVAC is not until after you get electrical.
Right.
At the minimum weeks, at maximum months. And we've been in there for months since we had this thing closed in, because we work slow and I'm not a builder. So anyway, I've had a dehumidifier running in that house, a big dehumidifier, it pulls 100 pints a day for the last year. It's been living in the crawl space, pulling out moisture all the time because it's an airtight house. We also now have air filtration going on, but my radon system is just a passive radon system right now, and it doesn't work at all. We have 12 picocuries per liter in there right now, which the limit that's like safe, which I want to be 0, is 4.
4, right.
We're at 12 inside that house. If in a normal build site, you get subcontractors coming in for 2 days, 3 days a week, maybe. Me and my mom and my dad are in that house every single day, and it's airtight, and it's super humid and muggy and hot outside. And that house is nice and cool and dry because of all the stuff I'm doing to it, but we don't have the radon system on. So like, spray foam is bad for you, but let's just go ahead and say all construction is bad for you. In fact, any carpenter who doesn't wear a mask when they're working with saws is crazy, because that is like, you look at the list of carcinogens that end up, and my dad, I love my dad tons, but he'll even say, well, it's an irritant. It's not a mutagen or something like that. I'm like, what do you think cancer is? It's just your body getting irritated enough. So anyway, I just think that there's this whole mentality in construction of like the tough guy thing.
Right.
That
clearly.
Do not take seriously.
What's interesting though? I think, and not to say that the pandemic is a positive in this regard, but people are being, I think, more attuned to having some sort of a mask or a respirator on now, and I think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be as taboo on a construction site to see workers wearing respirators anymore. The caveat, of course, is that you actually have to have OSHA compliant respiratory protection programs in place if you're actually wearing respirators. Right. And, and fit testing and it's like people just sticking that stuff on their face. The N95s, those are respirators. So they call them masks. That's the big misnomer, right? An N95 is a respirator. You do have to have a compliant OSHA respiratory protection program in place to use those, in the workplace. So I don't, maybe it'll change a little bit, but you're right. I think there is this stigma. Well, it's, you look at that whole bias. I've having been an IAQ consultant for all these years, that when you go into a work site to investigate an IAQ complaint, typically there's a higher prevalence of IAQ complaints with women workers than male workers. And part of it, I think, is the male stigma of, in the workplace of you can't complain, something's bothering you, but you don't let on to it. You're not going to, be in touch with your feelings about a project, what's happening, it's part of it.
Hmm.
I don't think it's just a physiological thing. I think there is actually just this social stigma too.
Sure, that might be part of it too. I mean, I do think it's important for men to understand that there is a physiological difference, though, that women actually are more sensitive to some things. And so it's like, if you can't smell it and a woman can smell it, it's probably not that she's inventing it. She actually is better at smelling things than you are. But I'm stronger. Yeah, I get what
I'm a
saying.
firm believer here after 34 years of being a consultant that everybody has a different level of trigger to different constituents. And just, if somebody has a complaint about an indoor environmental issue, there's probably an issue that's affecting them. People don't just make this stuff up generally. I mean, the percentage of people that maybe fabricate it are like a fraction of a percent, maybe. Right. Anybody that's saying there's a problem probably is experiencing something that bothers them, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. That was one of the recent videos that we released on our channel was we work with Prism Analytical Technologies, which is a lab. And you've worked with them too. And you can send in samples. They send you a little pump and you take a sample. And I wanted to know what was in this duct insulation that I've been working with that smells like a cat peed on it. I don't think that's okay. So I work with rock wool, and no, it wasn't cat pee. No cats had peed on
cats. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, right. No, apparently it always smells like that. And that was like a big giveaway to me. I was like, oh, well, we're going to do a test on this because that's what our channel is for. Mm-hmm. And so we did a test on it, and the test, the equipment couldn't pick up on what it was that I was smelling. It was like, well, these all seem like normal levels. And of course it was VOC that I'm smelling. Most of what you smell is VOCs. Sorry about this is something that you would maybe smell. Cats are very, very clean, but they're, by the way, that's one of the things about this house. There's a litter box in here, but it's 200 square feet and you can't smell it.
You're ventilated quite well.
We're tuned.
Sorry.
There's pressure imbalances at work here that are designed in. So anyway, I think that that's the problem, is that we smell things, and we've been taught that VOCs are bad, which is actually not true. True. It's like maybe an indicator. But if you smell something that you think smells like cat pee, you might think, uh-oh, am I being poisoned? And that's what we tested, is like, and it turns out, no, I just don't like the smell of cat pee, and it's going to go away, and it's not on the list of things that are problematic. So the smell, the sensation of something can be different than the toxicity of the thing.
Oh,
which
clearly.
Is, again, comes back to radon, for example, which you can't smell, but it's bad for you.
Well, I mean, you think about it, our olfactory senses, right, our sense of scent, is pretty fine. It's a pretty fine thing. Like if you were to go out and look for total VOCs with a photoionization detector, right, you take a PID out there, even a parts per billion resolution, we're able to get, sense with our noses, often things that are even, stuff that you can't even detect on a part per billion level photoionization detector, as far as volatile organic compounds.
Wine, same thing. They can't make a computer that can analyze wine the way that a person can.
Well, it can't get as snobbish.
Well, that too. I'm sure that'll come before.
Yeah, but I mean, but that's a good point. It's like, so the question between a nuisance odor versus something that really presents a physiological risk. But does it not, if you're being bothered by something, and I would make this argument as a consultant, all these years of dealing in all these different environments, that if somebody's being bothered by it to the extent that it's affecting, how they're living, then whether or not it's a nuisance odor, is almost irrelevant, isn't it? Because it does ultimately have a chain reaction on your life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going in the weeds here, but.
No, that's okay. I'm starting to go off into the weeds of just perception in general. Just because you can't smell something or you can't sense something doesn't mean it's there, with all this political turmoil that's going on.
We're going to go there before we're done, but we're going to take it toward the end of the show. So, we take less arrows on Q&A. We can take less Q&A arrows. So I'm going to put up a graphic now for your season 2 of Home Diagnosis. So we're going to talk about that in a second here. Corbett, and Grace host the show Home Diagnosis. That's on what, 70% of the public TV stations in the country, or
It's on
good
over
number?
60%
Okay.
season 1, which was
Okay.
kind of amazing because no one has ever made a show like this before. It's a science show about homes. So it's not a home show, and it's not really a science show purely. So anyway, nobody knew what it was. And so they all took it on like a gamble. And so that was kind of impressive because it was only 6 episodes in the first season. It was a mini series. So the second season is going to be a full 13 episodes.
And when is that slated to debut?
We have already filmed 9 of the 13 episodes, and we're editing ourselves. We have our editing station right down there where I was finishing the most recent Healthy Indoors Minute. And so we're hoping, I mean, COVID set us back a little bit because it changed the rules of how we need to shoot, and which I'm happy to talk about. But we're hoping for February that it would start airing, February 2021.
And you think more stations are going to pick it up around the country, or?
Almost guaranteed. One of the main problems that people had was that it was only 6 episodes, so it doesn't really fill. When programmers are trying to fill up their schedules, they don't really like 6 episodes because it means they have to pick another miniseries that then they have to go search around for it. So anyway, that was one thing. The other thing is that a lot of them perceived, which is a false perception, but PBS is like insane for the nonprofit kind of allergic to money perspective. They thought that this was a commercial for building performance, which I don't even know what that means, but also it's an educational show. Anyway, we scrubbed out all the logos on the show, but the fact that the sponsors were all from the building industry was a worry for them. So on the second season, our main sponsor is the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation.
There you go.
So now they have no argument to stand on. So I think that, yes, we'll see that it'll jump upwards of 80% on the second season.
Nice. And I saw some of the, you did some kind of like backstage behind the scenes footage on shooting season 2. I saw people wearing masks and the production crew and everything. What type of, how did this pandemic change how you had to shoot this?
Sure. So we had a script. We have a template that used to sit right here, actually, and we've been kind of like scribbling in it. But we open up the show. Every episode is half an hour, and that's intentional. We don't want to bore people with physics and chemistry and microbiology, and also we want them to come to our website and learn more. But we would open it up, talk a little bit about the main topic that we're going to talk about. In episode, the second season episodes are basically a crash course in the science of homes or building science. Building science typically has been mostly about physics. So we like the science of homes topic, but the way that it works out is like we talk about architecture versus performance and how you can design something that's very, very pretty, but it might work terribly. Energy efficiency versus performance. Something that's very energy efficient might also perform terribly for people to live there. We talk about the reality of home building. We talk about holes in the house, things like windows and doors and skylights and all of the things that you're intentionally building into your house that are then going to defeat the performance and how you can attune those things. We talk about cooling and drying. We talk about heating. We talk about air quality. We talk about the sun. We'll talk about solar energy for literally about a millisecond and then say there's a lot more to talk about with the sun. Solar gains. We're talking about shading. We're talking about photocatalytic reactions, all kinds of things to do with the sun. So all of that kind of is how we break it up. But we wanted to visit people's houses where they were having problems with the topic of the day. And now we can't do that because our crew that we hire is like 6 or 8 people.
Yeah.
And they've got a whole bunch of equipment that was literally just somewhere else yesterday shooting something else. And we're not going to load all this equipment into somebody's house and potentially contaminate their house or potentially take whatever their house is contaminated with to the next gig.
And bring a whole production crew into their house. Yeah.
Exactly. So we're stuck on this property. And so we like limitations. We were always that way when we were professional artists, and we still like it. It just forces you to think more creatively. So we've had to stay put on this property. We've got tiny house that's under construction. We've got a little troll house that's made of rocks that has no door. It's like a little 5 square foot structure. We have a workshop. We've got the dry vault, which is my tool shed. We have a bunch of different like little outbuildings that we can use to explain the story of whatever it is that we're talking about. So we've had to really think around some weird corners with that. But that's essentially what's going on. We also are doing all of our interviews on Zoom now instead of flying people here and talking to them on site, which is a little bit it's
different.
fine.
It's different. It's
It
different.
is
But quite
different.
frankly, I think this is becoming, more of the norm. I think it will be, and I think it's much more accepted. Just online everything, right? It's
Right.
and I'm curious to see how this shakes out. But I believe in 2021 and beyond, making the leap of faith that we will get beyond this pandemic someday. Someday I believe we will. I don't know when that day is, uh, but I think there's still going to be a component of this online using these virtual tools that I think will stick with us. People will
Hmm.
be more comfortable
Yep.
than they were. Because you look at us, like people like us, like you and Grace have been in video production, so you're no strangers to cameras and doing things like this. I've been involved in production for decades, so this is not uncomfortable. We've been using Zoom for 5 years, ever since it pretty much came out. So
You
that's
invented it, I think.
I did not invent it. No, the team from Cisco invented it when they failed and started it. But that's another story. But it is a good platform, for all its flaws. And I think what it's done is it's let people have this experience, for better or worse, of virtually communicating.
Hmm.
So
Hugging each other. There should be a hug icon. How do I do that? That's
you're gonna
my
have to do a
cats.
Facebook, Facebook
Facebook hug.
live stream. Then
I
you
have
can
to
have
change
all
platforms.
the little icon blubs coming up, as when you're live streaming on Facebook,
Mhm.
and you can get all of your personal affirmations that
My
way.
dopamine hit.
Yeah,
My
you gotta
personal
have it.
hug.
If you get the likes. So we're half. This went fast, by the way. We're already halfway through our allotted time. Um, you know, we broached upon this when we did those initial 3 episodes together at the onset of talking about the pandemic, and this subject, it's kind of a taboo subject that we've you brought up. I remember in the first show about some of the racial injustice and underserved communities, and how they are potentially being more adversely affected by the pandemic. But in subsequent stories and articles we've covered with Healthy Indoors, it seems like that theme has carried forward much beyond the pandemic, to talking about how there's really social injustice that goes into housing in general and sustainability.
Hmm.
And then Kevin Kennedy's been on numerous times, and he'll always bring up the fact that there's underserved communities that are more prone to having asthma issues and other underlying health issues, and it's because really a lot of it due to the fact that people are living in substandard housing, and
Right.
there seems to be a common denominator there. It's people of color mostly,
Right.
not
Well,
always, but mostly.
when we were talking about the COVID, the quarantine how-tos and the little tips, all of the tips were for people living in single-family homes. And we realized, like, at the end of the day, we're kind of like, what happened to all the multifamily and the renters? Like, what are they supposed to do? Because they're going up and down in elevators, that they're
Right.
in an elevator. Like, literally, you're not supposed to be
Stay
there.
in your home.
What is that? So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's that is definitely a problem. And lots of people will, the big problem, I think, is that people, we think of everything that's an argument as a entree to another argument that's some kind of a bigger thing that's about an election somewhere. And I honestly don't care about.
I get that. But that does, you can't discount the fact that does come into play because we're in a presidential election year.
Right.
Yeah,
I think
it's inevitable that somebody's gonna
yeah, right.
read
But
that
I think
into
that
it.
if it wasn't an election, we would have the same. People would be arguing about something else. They would be finding fault about something else.
Yeah, no doubt. We did a show about a month ago. It all starts to blur together now, and during this pandemic and lockdown and everything. But we did a show where we had Suzanne Shelton and Lily Abron were on, and we were talking about it started out about talking about how there's racial inequality with sustainable building practices and all that. But we there was an interesting question that was brought up: is define the usage of these two terms, home and housing.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? It's like the term housing is kind of something that we refer to a lot of places where the underserved communities tend to get stuck.
Sure.
There was they live in housing, but we all in white America have homes.
Yes. It was really striking
and
when we moved here. Grace and I lived in Chicago before here in Atlanta. And I lived in a majority Black neighborhood in Chicago called Hyde Park, which is where the University of Chicago is based. Not because I was going there. I happened to be in that neighborhood for a year. And so anyway, I've lived there. I've lived here. This is a majority Black part of town. And when we moved here, I would ask people where they lived, and they would tell me where they stayed. I'm staying over on, or I stay here. And it kind of was jarring. It was like, you don't live there, you're just staying there. And it really is like, that's what you're referring to, is this, like, it's housing. Like, it's just a place where you just put your things for a little bit until you're forced to go somewhere else because of whatever factors. And there's a whole list of, factors that would have people have to relocate. But yeah, it's definitely a different, we do not think of that naturally, I think, as like a majority white male group of people in this sustainability or high performance or whatever space. That's just not something that comes natural to us, is to think like, oh, well, what about this? And that's the thing, that we don't have the smell receptors for that. Like I did not realize until this year that white people are really scary. That's how a lot of Black and brown people see white people. That's the first thing that they notice, is how terrifying we are.
There is a reason for that historically.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's not,
and whether or not you personally are scary, and like we're both,
it doesn't matter. Guys, it doesn't matter.
Right. Exactly. It's like a thing. It's like if you go to another planet and you didn't ask to be the representative of the entire human race, but you are, whether or not you like it. You are there.
Awful choice in my case.
You're the one that, okay. I know, right? I'm not qualified, but that's what's happening right now. And so anyway, we all, we're representatives of all the white people who came before. Our white ancestors did some pretty seriously crazy stuff, violent stuff. And even as late as 1947 here in Georgia, they had a lynching of like a bunch of people. I don't know if it was 4 people or 6 people, but I mean, that's gross.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want to talk about that because it's not nice.
Well, a lot of people don't want to talk about a lot of things. I mean, again, we're getting way off, off the deep end, but
air quality.
But here's the point where I think we're on the deep end, but we're not, Corbett, in my opinion, because again, it goes back to the indoor living conditions, the indoor environmental conditions, people's health outcomes as a result of those conditions. So, and that was why we took that on in the cover story 2 issues ago with Healthy Indoors, much to the chagrin of some of our readers that weren't really happy that we started making statements that some people, perceived as political, and they weren't. I see that as apolitical. It's not a political issue to me.
Right.
It's a fact is what it is. It's a situation. There's it doesn't matter what your affiliation is. There's inequity, and this inequity causes some people to have poorer health outcomes than others.
Right.
And so I think we have to have the conversation, but it's uncomfortable, and it's very uncomfortable because we're, you and I are both in, industries, right? The indoor environmental and the building performance industries, and, which are mainly dominated by white males. No question about that. So it's uncomfortable to have those conversations, and you and I are both poking the bear right now.
Yeah,
a little bit.
So for anybody who's interested, who's like interested and not interested, like in trolling some comments later, but we have a minority training scholarship. Grace and I rolled one out last year, actually. So if you'd like to learn more about building performance, we have a scholarship program for minorities and women, because we believe that we need to get more people in here. Like, and the way that I couch that is like, think about all the people who are having air quality problems right now, who are in Spanish speaking only communities where they just don't speak English very well. Who out there is talking about building performance or healthy indoors with those people? Like, no one. We need more people who speak Spanish to go into those households and talk about this stuff, because anybody who's a contractor in building performance knows you're the only contractor in town who talks about air quality. Everybody thinks that you're trying to scam them. You need multiple people talking about this same thing, and people are like, oh, well, this is obviously a thing. Like, the reason I haven't heard of it is because I've been listening to the wrong people. So I think it's really important that we have women, we have people of color, talking about all of the things that you talk about in Healthy Indoors magazine.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And the thing is, and when we did those panels back in March, it was scarily apparent that, not by no intention of ours, we're somewhat tone deaf based on the fact we are, white males. Exactly. And we see the world that way. and it's, it's, you have to, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that bias, that and again, not saying that it's, the bias is anything that you did, is pre
it's not intentional. It's an
yeah, not at
autopilot
all.
thing. We're
it's not,
all
but
brought
it,
up
but it,
that way.
you
Yeah,
have to recognize it, because if you don't recognize it and you don't actually state it, and Suzanne Shelton did that very eloquently in her editorial in the June issue of Healthy Indoors. It's like she's writing about it, and then she goes halfway down going, look at what happens in my business, and she basically came around and said, wow, what I've thought about everything to date is all bullshit. It's like, wow, it's like, this is, again, she's a white woman in a business space that's predominantly male, but nonetheless, she goes,
I mean, I think that this is an interesting time to, you can see who actually likes learning and who likes getting enough learning so that they can just throw their weight around and be the one who is the authority. Because I'm a white man and I'm really eating up learning about how wrong I've been about a lot of things and how embarrassing sometimes I am when I open my big mouth and I say something that's like such a white man thing to say. In fact, let me just say this real quick, because this is like an interesting thing. There's like a game where you name yourself in 3 words. You describe yourself with 3 adjectives.
Does that involve alcohol, or I'm not sure?
No. It's just like, Bob Krell, tell me who Bob Krell is in 3 words. And you're like, oh, like radical, great hair, singer. You know what I mean? But I feel for me, and I pride myself on being a very interesting person. I always try to be super interesting and not a copy of somebody else. I try to be myself. I have realized that the 3 words that I would have to use that predicate everything else in my life, everything I've been able to accomplish with our television show, with the YouTube channel, with my career choice, with the music that I play, with the fact that I'm able to build a house with my parents, white American man. Those are my 3 words. Like, there's literally no room for creative or interesting or like talkative, because the fact that I am those other things is totally based in the fact that I have this free, I'm like just so blessed by so many things. I had, happened to be born as a white man in the richest, most powerful country on the planet back when I was born. I'm not sure how it's going to turn out after this whole thing is done. But I mean, like, it's why I love the topic that we picked, building performance. I could literally talk all day long about it. I could be sitting here and notice something on a wall and think about like, oh, well, that could have impacts on blah, blah, blah. And it's just because like my mind is there. My mind is not on things like multi-family housing and what the problem with renting and controlling air quality in a building where there's a split incentive and I want to have better air quality, but I'm not paying for the building. And so then the landlord is blah, blah, blah. My mind is just not there. So you need to have people who are thinking about that, whose mind is there in the room when you're having these conversations, or else there is no way you can have the imagination to think about it. Just like somebody who's starting out in building performance could never hold an all-day class and actually keep the class's attention, just making stuff up off the cuff. And you and I could just do that. We could get up and give an hour and a half presentation on our expert topic because like we just think about it all the time.
Right.
It's very simple.
Well, and that's an interesting point you raised there. Because you don't necessarily have those perspectives, and it's interesting. So the upcoming issue, I'm going to change hats. A Building Performance Journal, the Building Performance Association's trade association magazine, now that I happen to also publish. Our cover story is talking about gaining or increasing diversity in the workforce, in the building performance and weatherization workforce, and how do we do that? I mean, it's Suzanne Shelton, and our previous guests in different shows that we broached that subject, but then I don't know if we have a lot of answers. Like how do we change the landscape of these industries? What do you think? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there because I mean, it's a tough question because I've been asked that too, and I go, we need, I always say we need to do this, and then it's like, well, how are we going to do that? And I'm like,
exactly.
I don't really have the answer.
That's where people who are on the other side of the fence would say, you're just blowing smoke, you're just talking, all talk and no action. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. So Grace and I have this minority scholarship, and I have a dozen scholarship students, and like, to be perfectly honest, this scholarship is unlimited in number and it's infinite in time frame. So I could potentially, and it's only limited in North America. we had somebody apply from India, and I was like, I'm not sure if I want to open a Pandora's box of like just allowing anybody who's brown from anywhere in the planet, because they're
Well,
not
it's
a
not,
minority in their country. Anyway, it was just like, it was an
but
interesting
it's also,
question.
yeah, you have a limited bandwidth of what you can deal
It's
with, and
true, and
can
also
you
I
be
don't speak
global? I mean,
exactly. So it's like it's hard with all the other things. But I will say that we put that out there, and like clearly I could do a better job of putting that out there. It's basically a 90% scholarship for all of our trainings, and I don't know what else to do aside from that. That's something. Like I'm doing something, and I feel good about that. But no, I don't. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I think that the answer is that if more people made more money, they would feel happy to. Like I don't have employees at all. I don't hire employees because I've had that before. And anyway, if I was in that place and I was ready to hire somebody, I would do what I could to hire a minority, 100%. Because if you don't do it, then that's it. You're the one who needs to do it. So
right,
it's like,
right. No, and Suzanne, Shelton mentioned that same thing in her workforce too. It's like,
right.
Not because any reason they haven't, but she said no people of color have ever applied for a position.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, and then she said, like, that's a lame answer. She goes,
and
I
that's
need to go out and seek people. It's
right.
like,
So,
and try to find people.
So our
and make
minority
it.
scholarship is partnered with Matt Reisinger and Brian Orr. They're both mentors for our students. And that was the thing that we came up against, is like, you can't just say we would, Black people are welcome in this, or women are welcome, or minorities should come and be in building performance or in indoor air quality or whatever it is. Like that's not enough to just say, oh yeah, we'd be perfectly happy to hire you. You have to go out and say, please, like I'm begging you, you gotta please come out here and do this. So you have to have a lot more of an active role in this. And actually actively pursue people to make it more than just, oh, we welcome you, because that's very nice, but it's not.
Yeah, because it's still a very passive position to take that really won't affect any real positive change. And the thing is, there, like you illustrated, in order to have change happen at ground level and in these individual residences and everything, you need to have people from those communities as part of the stewards of these programs.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the only way they're going to be, tailored properly and received, favorably received. You're right. I mean, so it's like a catch-22 to some extent, right? Because it's hard to move the industry forward if you don't move into those communities and do things. But you need to have people from those communities as part of the industry.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. So I went to Utah before the pandemic. I got to go to Utah. We hired a videographer, and I went with the Utah Weatherization Program, which is a really interesting one. They spend a lot of money on training, and so weatherization is the low income home performance assistance program, right? In case nobody's familiar with it, and they get the word out through community involvement. Like not everybody who's in these communities can get on Facebook and knows how to get a hold of information. That's one of the main benefits of being a white male in America, right? Is that we have total confidence in our ability to find the resources that we need. We know that it exists out there. We know how to search for it, and we know how to meet the people who are going to plug us in with that. These communities don't have that. That's not something that they feel very confident about. So the word of mouth is very important. And the problem comes in where you realize that there are people like us who are not like us mentally. They're just, in the same position as we are, where they can get any of the resources they need. Mm-hmm. And they've learned how to game the system, because the asset in the weatherization assistance program is not the house that gets weatherized. So you might spend $10,000 weatherizing a home, but the asset that the government will count as like, oh, good, we did this. Here's the checkbox next to the thing that we just did. What we just did was help Betty Davis. We didn't help the address 3621, whatever street. We helped that woman. And so what they then learn, that the landlords have learned, that they can move Betty from that house that just got weatherized and be like, oh, you know what? I'm going to have to do something to that house. I'm going to have to put you over here. And then they reapply Betty in the program, because Betty is the asset. She's the one with the income verification, not the address. And then she gets another weatherization thing. And there are these landlords out there who are like gaming the system and moving their tenants around to get all of their houses weatherized. And so, like the game is being played, whether it's by people who honestly need the help and are wanting
Hmm.
it, or
Sure.
by people who have access to the people who like, have their fingers in the money pots, and they can say, oh, well, what's the loophole in your system? How can I game this to
Right.
get what I want out of it? And I think that that's part of what's sad about this whole thing is that like, there's lots of assistance and resources. And people will say all the time, like, oh, well, we give so much money on blah, blah, blah. But like, how much of that actually ends up with the people who need it? And how much of it goes to people who can figure out how to game the system?
Right. And the thing is too with weatherization, I mean, I know there's kind of an impetus for change in dealing with what I'm about to say, but for the most part, historically, weatherization deals with energy saving type measures, but not so much in indoor environmental measures.
Correct.
Like, there's usually a small caveat. You can do something for some asbestos, or you can do something for whatever. But how many times are there projects where that are proposed weatherization projects, and they end up being shelved and not done because there's mold all over, there's a moisture problem in the building. Okay, we can't do that one, and they walk away from it. I heard what you call it, heard it on many people in the programs around the country where the percentage is I think sometimes maybe 40% or so ones
Mm-hmm.
that are actually projects that could go ahead, except there's an indoor environmental issue like mold or asbestos or lead or something that's not energy performance based, and they
Right.
end up not able to do the project.
Well, even then, they
So the
might
people
never
that need it the
sell the
most
house.
don't get work done.
Well, that's true. Yeah. And then also when they do things that what's called the total resource cost, the TRC, it's like a book that lays out how we value these improvements to houses. And human health is very hard to quantify right now
Clearly.
for all this stuff. So, what we value is this. And so if we can save that, which then leads to savings on a national defense scale for energy, great, we can value that. But as far as valuing people's asthma or ventilation rates or indoor air quality or particle counts or anything like that, like they just don't have the guns
Mhm.
to be able to do that in that program right now. And so they they'll air tighten a house and then have to install ventilation, but they don't get any credit for installing ventilation. So
Right.
then they just went into the red on that project. So that means that they have to make it up on another project that picks a bunch of really easy houses that aren't complicated at all, which are the ones, of course, that need the help.
Right. And which is unfortunate. We had Larry Zarker from BPI and Kevin Kennedy on last week talking about their new healthy housing principles program that BPI rolled out just last week, and that came up a lot. It's like it seems like there's a ton of projects that don't get looked at, or don't actually get implemented, for those very reasons. And then how do you quantify that, and how do you get it into play? And one of the thoughts is trying to encourage the insurance industries, especially in the health insurance industries,
Mm-hmm.
to realize that they have more positive outcomes if these people are in better environmental conditions, which overall, in a, which another comment, in a for-profit medical system lowers their outlay of costs. If you lower trips to the ER due to asthma attacks and things like that, there's actually, real hard ball savings going on.
Right. There was a little meme that I saw on Instagram. Instagram is my hobby of choice lately. It's my brain candy. And it was like most expensive night stay in Italy, and it showed this picture of this beautiful palazzo. And then there's like Norway, and there's like this glass house in the middle of a glacier. And then in the US, it's a hospital bed. That's the most expensive place that you can stay overnight. And you stay there for 4 nights, and it's $40,000. And I think that's to bring it back around to the quarantine thing. I think that's like one of the problems with this black and white American action movie way of thinking about building performance or air quality or pandemic or whatever, is like not everyone's going to die. Well, dying is not the worst thing or the only bad thing that can happen to you. You could also get driven into debt by having an $80,000 medical bill, and then have your health insurance that's run by your work say, well, did you get COVID while you were at work? And then they drop you. And now you have $80,000 in debt, and you've got a lingering lifelong problem with your lung. It means you can never run again. I mean, like, there's all kinds of bad things that can happen. And it's like, did they die?
Oh, and will happen, not just can.
Who cares?
These things will happen. These things are happening.
Yeah.
You're right. It's not just the black and white numbers of the fatalities. It's much more than that. In fact, well, clearly, you've got 40 million people out of work. I mean, there's a lot of, ancillary effects of, what's happening, as a result of this pandemic. And we're not, I hate being pessimistic, but we're not anywhere near the bright spot on this.
Yeah. And I think that it's the same. I mean, it goes for all healthy indoor stuff. It's like, is it going to kill people? I mean, is radon, we're still arguing about radon. There's so many more things to talk about. Like, aside from the fact that radon there's science, but, moisture levels, dehumidification, et cetera, et cetera. We're building houses differently than we ever have before. And we have to really pay attention to that. And I still go into, I had a builder the other day who's building a 16,000 square foot house, and it's 2 air changes per hour. It's very, very tight for a house. No ventilation system, because they just haven't ever had the complaint. And that's most of my clients come from complaints. It's like, oh, well, we have all our clients are starting to like complain about this or that. We'd like to hire your services, only to fix problems, never to prevent them or predict them.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because, like, again, you mentioned, how builders are tightening up houses, and getting super tight houses. And well, yeah, then you're going to have some mechanical provisions to, to air change those spaces. You're going to have moisture issues and subsequent microbial issues. And I don't think you're going to fix it just by having a bathroom fan that runs more.
Right. Well, yeah,
that's really not the right solution.
Right, exactly. So until there's an explosion or something like that, people just don't. It's hard. We're all busy. I get it. People have kids. People have soccer practice and, breakfast dates and stuff like that.
But we're also, if at least for the next year, and maybe who knows, forever, we're going to spend more time at home. Many more people will probably be, telecommuting, working from home, because that's the one thing we've shown is, man, a lot of these jobs don't need to be occurring in a commercial office space. It's like, oh, we can actually have video meetings and accomplish our tasks not actually being there. It's not for everybody, right? Some people really want the community spirit of being in an office environment, and some people thrive in that. Some people don't.
Yeah.
So, but I think you're going to see more of people spending more time indoors at home, which means you would think, right, that the result of that would be that people would have more concern of their indoor environments at home. Perhaps.
And I think that part of the problem that we're trying to solve with season 2 and with season 3, which I can talk about what the topic of that is.
Yeah, let's do that.
Is just to let people know what the problem is, like that there is a problem. And I think most people don't get that there are things going on potentially. So season 3 is going to be disasters. What happens if you don't pay attention to this stuff? So, an obvious example of it is like a house that gets flooded. You could bring in all the dehumidifiers and fans and bleach you want, but can you ever get that house back to, or whatever it is that
stop
an ozone generator? I mean, there's like all kinds of horrible chemical things that you can do to houses.
Bad examples, but okay.
But I mean, like the point is that those things do have an application, and there is a positive application for those technologies. People use them all the time for weird, crazy stuff. And anyway, you even ever take that house back to pre-flood conditions? It turns out that if you buy a house from somebody who had a dog, the ecosystem of the microbial life in that house still has a dog, even after they move out and you move
for a period of time.
Yeah. So I mean, that's important to talk. Third-hand smoke, all that stuff. It's like it's invisible and it's in the materials that are around us. It's a system.
Becomes resident.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same logic of, why people don't want to buy cars that were experienced a flood. Cars that came out of like a hurricane.
Right.
Think about that, right? Oh, it's a flood vehicle. And it's like nobody wants that, but they buy flood houses.
Right. Or cars where people smoked all the time, or cars where people smoked crack, or meth houses, or there's.
Yeah, I mean, those are extreme examples, but you think in the course of the lifespan of the typical house or any building, there's going to be water events. It's a given, right? There's going to be some sort of either an outside exterior, major, weather event that causes a flood, or you're going to more likely, almost every building is going to experience plumbing issues that's going to cause flooding.
Not my house though, right?
Oh, well, I can't speak to your house, but
my house right now, they're doing the plumbing test. I've got the drain, the sewer at the bottom is plugged, And there's
Okay.
water all the way filled up until the second floor bathtub is halfway full of water. And it's just going to sit like that until inspection. I actually didn't know that that's how they did it, but it's got literally thousands of pounds of water just sitting in there trying
That's
to get out.
interesting. So you're pressure testing that drain side.
Yeah,
Pretty
but
heavy.
that's the code test everywhere. Like, I
Is
don't
that
know
really done?
why.
I wasn't
I
aware of
know,
that, to be
crazy.
honest. Now
Yeah.
I feel like I just learned something major today.
Isn't that amazing? So
Ah,
yeah, it just sits there until the inspector comes, and then they say, okay, great, you're not leaking, good to go. And then you just pull the plug.
okay. Well, so I guess we're gonna find out, right? Thus
We
far,
will
it's been
over the next
okay.
couple of days. But yeah, no, it wasn't leaking. If it leaks it's going to leak in the first 15 minutes. Normally.
Yeah,
So,
it would make sense.
yeah.
But but the point I was making, I guess, is that we're not going to say all buildings. Okay, most buildings will experience some sort of water occurrence
but not
in the scope.
Yes.
I said most. I gave you the caveat
Right.
to
No,
it.
that's okay. But I think, yeah. So anyway, everything that happens, just like everything that happens to a person, it's going to leave a scar. It's going to do
Yeah,
something.
it does, right? And we generally don't build to accommodate for that. We have products that are still moisture susceptible, and things happen, and we're improving some of that. But I tell you, I got in this industry back in pretty much '86, and I really thought we were going to make massive improvement on doing things, and I still see the same stupid building practices and design practices for the most part taking place here in 2020 that I saw in 1986.
Mm-hmm.
Things have gotten a better, but they haven't improved to the scale that they should have.
Or they've improved, but we've had new side effects come out.
Well, that too.
And we're not measuring the improvement either. So.
Well, it's hard. So, I mean, obviously, you and I sit in some challenging industries. And I think we're still neophytes overall, and hopefully we can continue to move it forward and improve.
Awesome.
And
keep learning.
To that end, Corbett, what you're doing with your show, with Home Diagnosis, I think it's a great show. Those of you who haven't seen Home Diagnosis, you absolutely do need to see Home Diagnosis. It's a great series.
And you can at homediagnosis.tv. Because it's a public television show, so we own the copyright, and it's on YouTube.
Perfect. So and you also have the Building Performance Workshop.
Yep,
that's where you do training.
Workshop.com. Yep, you can get lots of resources there and apply for that scholarship if you know anybody who's interested in this topic. But we've got lots of different training things and just trying to elevate the entire construction industry, just like you're doing, Bob.
Well, we're doing our part, right? When we're trying to actually move things forward. To that end, let you all know, healthyindoors.com is where you can watch the live streamed episodes of this show, as well as any of the previous recordings and podcasts. Also, Healthy Indoors Magazine's available there, which is a free digital monthly publication. You can actually access our whole 8 years. And by the way, we are 8 years. Corbett, I just realized this. We're 8 years old today with Healthy Indoors.
Happy birthday.
We launched our first magazine exactly 8 years. Oh, that's crazy.
That's awesome. Good job.
Nuts. Crazy life. It was the 6th of August. Wow. It just dawned on me now. Seeing
happy
that.
Anniversary.
Yeah, happy anniversary. Wow. That's they grow up so fast.
Thanks for and thanks for the invitation today. I hope to talk with you again soon.
Thanks so much for being here. Again, Corbett Lunsford, co-host of the PBS Television series Home Diagnosis. Thanks for joining us today. Till next time, I'm Bob Krell, the publisher of Healthy Indoors magazine, and I guess the chief prognosticator, if that's even a word, of the Healthy Indoors show. So we'll see you next Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time, for the Healthy Indoors show. Until then, please stay healthy. Stay well, and we'll see you soon.